Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Cave of the Cross Apologetics. I am Patrick.
And I'm Tony.
And we're in the heart of our book, What About Evil? To see why men's hearts are so corrupt and evil, and why hurricanes happen, and bug bites, and all sorts of big evils
People
and little
fall
evils.
Off bicycles. And
So we have to explain every single instance. So if we don't, then it just gives the atheists an ability to point to it and say, see, why did this happen?
That's right. Stub their toe.
Right.
You don't have an explanation for it.
So we've crested the hill type deal. We've come to the apex of his theory of the Greater-Glory Theodicy, and he's developed his theology. And right now he's going over kind of the importance of God, who God is, why he receives glory, and now in chapter 14, the Peerless Redeemer, he's talking about probably one of the best chapters I've read. It's very succinct, very good on why Jesus had to come, how he did, in the form that he did, what he did, why he did certain things. I just tweeted out after saying, "Hey, we're getting ready to shoot this, but buy this book just for this chapter because it's just
a good chapter."
Bookmark this if you have good reads and you delve down into like, here's the books I have on this subject. Put this book in Incarnation so that when you have questions on the Incarnation, this is a chapter you're gonna really refer to, and he just does an excellent job on this. So we start out by saying that we saw at the end of the previous chapter, in chapter 13, that there is something deeply ironic, surprising, and unconventional about the way in which the triune God addresses the problem of evil. Right? He doesn't come down and wipe it out. He doesn't snap his fingers like Q, in the old Star Treks of just, he changes everything, and now, everything's in the upside down world, and you have to figure out what happened and if you need it. But he sends this baby into the world, and this baby is of two natures, and there's something odd and weird about what's going on here. Jesus Christ defeats evil in a comprehensive display of both conventional and unconventional power. Kind of what you would expect from an all-powerful God. Yeah. Evil comes face to face, not just with the usual and expected displays of divine retribution, the anger, the judgment,
wrath,
the fire, brimstone, the sulfur, all that stuff, but also the unusual and unexpected display of his extraordinary mercy. Judgment expected, mercy the weird.
The unexpected.
We don't expect the God of perfect and judgment and glory and majesty to go, there is another way. And that this required the incarnation of the Son of God, which Son of God manifesting in the incarnation. This is the weird, the odd, the unexpected. It required that God invest himself in weakness and vulnerability, and this is utterly confounding. And people have been writing about it for 2,000 years and still marvel and weep and are scratching their heads. And it's a point of uniqueness that the Christian faith has, is that there's nothing that we do is our message, but our message is who someone is. And it's an end unto itself. It's not, this person's really smart, here's the message they have. Muhammad, Buddha, they're all smart people in that religion that you listen to because they're holy men. But here we preach Jesus Christ as the means to the end, and ultimately our message is a person rather than the full-on messages.
Right, exactly. And so Christensen, with regard to this weirdness, right, ask, how can the Son of God be joined to the, fragile, finite creation, right? How does does God mark, with supremacy and immutable strength, overpower evil with weakness, right? So not what expected. The mystery of the Incarnation, he tells us, in the crucifixion of the Son of God takes us to the nucleus of the divine solution to the problem of evil, right? He says, in this paradoxical reality, all the splendid rays of divine glory kind of converge and shine forth at their brightest, right?
And the New Testament is replete with this understanding of, I've come to bring you the ultimate message, not with words of wisdom and my speech, my tongue is of silver. It's no. What people view as kind of the stupid, I come to revel in it, or I come
foolishness. What they see as foolishness. Yeah.
This is weird. I'm going to preach something that is antithetical to the people of the Acropolis of Mars Hill, and they're going to say that there's the resurrection of the dead would be the worst thing I could possibly teach from. And yet some listen and some believe from that message. Yeah. So it's a message that even the writers understand is unique and unexpected, but point back to the Old Testament of saying, for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, this is what we should have come to expect. And you have like the Bereans searching the scripture and checking and seeing if Paul was actually telling the truth. And they say, oh, yep, we're some of the best believers.
Scripture backs it up, right?
Because we go back and we turn to Jonah. And here's the God who offers mercy against those that would reject him. But everyone believes in this, and it's unexpected mercy that comes about there.
Yeah.
All right, so the battle cry of the Incarnation. So the early church needed to bring clarity to the doctrine of God, the theology proper. We're something new is occurring. We're writing stuff down, and some of the biggest explosion of religious writing happens because people are reading their Bibles, they're getting saved, they're writing big tomes. All the hard words are coming in because you're in the midst of a Greek and Roman world, and so you're using terms like logos and morph and all these things that have a philosophical connotation that we're bringing in and trying to understand who is God, what makes him up, what makes God and others not, and this is where after the Incarnation, the death and resurrection, the very early church is writing about this because they're curious of, okay, exactly what does this mean? What do we see from Scripture that we can systematize and say, this is God and this is not God?
Right. How can we explain what happened?
And this thrusts Christians into debates about the Trinity. Not necessarily, in fact, it's almost odd that early church writing is more about defining the borders than it is about kind of convincing people. Jesus didn't have a body. Well, that's not what Scripture says. So let's codify it and signify it in early creeds, and eventually this resulted in the finely tuned definition of Christ's identity formulated at the Council of Chalcedon in AD 451. So the Roman world splits in the Western Eastern kingdoms in 286, and then right before Germanic barbarians take out the Western kingdom, which will upend the entire system that has been around since 27 BC, and the Pax Romana is done. The split in 476 is when the Western kingdom just gets taken out, and up until the Ottoman Empire, you won't have another kind of big empire. And so in the midst of this, you have a council that is sitting around and able to think about these things in the terms of Greek philosophy and Roman Koine Greek and Latin, and they're writing about this stuff and meeting and trying to define the borders of all these Gnostic people coming in the 2nd and 3rd century. Michael J. Kruger has a really good book about kind of that influence coming in, which was expected in the New Testament, and we see them further defining the orthodoxy, and not all these little orthodoxies that are the might out there, as Kostenberger And Michael J. Kruger wrote about the Bauer hypothesis was that no. There was
orthodoxy wasn't created. It was just recognized.
Right. Really. Exactly. And so, Council of Chalcedon, it didn't come up with brand new stuff. It was signifying, okay, here's what we know, and here's what is outside of that known items. And so, if you read some of the stuff from the council, they talk about. That there's one Christ, Lord, Son of God, only begotten, but comes from Mary. There's two natures which undergo no confusion, no change, no division, no separation. We have the words, and so they're not surprised by these proclamations. This is all these outside things are coming in, and we want to make clear what we talk about. Okay, so Jesus is fully God and fully man. To say that is 400 years of church history, writing about it and defining it and trying to come to understanding of, okay, what do we mean by nature, and can we apply kind of the Hellenistic Greek understanding philosophy that has gone out into the world because of the Greeks and the Romans, and can we utilize it for our understanding of things like the Trinity and being in person? Very important. But could we have not gotten that until maybe this moment in history? So, I always like to say, like, Jesus comes at a time when the Roman world has built the roads which the gospel goes out on. And so that's just an amazing thing of the time and place. And it seems like this would be a harder concept if you put it in 400 BC.
Right.
So, don't know.
The Greek world, by the way, had built the language that the gospel went out on. So it was, convergence of a lot
commoner
of things
language too. Which ironically, people of the church and people who got power of the church would try and go away from a common language to have things like only in Latin, and you'd have people burned at the stake for going, hey, how about in German? Wouldn't it be nice if that farm boy over there could know about the gospel? Whoa, that's way too much power. Oh, you're telling me that the gospel has power. Interesting. So he has a really good section here on the Council of Chalcedon, and he says, we all with one voice teach the confession of one and the same Son, our Lord Jesus, the perfect in the divinity and the perfect in humanity, the same truly God and truly man, of a rational soul and a body, consubstantiation of one substance, with the Father as regards his divinity, and some consubstantiation with us as regards his humanity, like us in all respects except for sin. Yeah. And it goes on, and you can read these confessions of the early church, and it's not Dan Brown level. Oh, it was a close one. It's like two people said no, and then they were
the overwhelming. Everybody basically said this is what the deal was, right? And so Christian tells us that while many claim that this battle to identify the Redeemer of the world involves unnecessary hair splitting, right? He says the fact is, pinning down the precise nature of the supreme protagonist makes all the difference between a winsome figure, parading across the stage of history, and the one victor standing apart. Again, this idea of peerless, right? Standing apart from all other victors, who has the unique and unprecedented qualities that are indispensable to defeat the crisis of a wrecked creation, right? So we have this, he says Jesus stands apart. And so they had to get this right. They had to clearly understand this in order to realize what God had done and what he was doing, right?
Right, especially in a world with demigods and, Hercules. Okay, well, he's of a sexual nature. He's part God and part human, and he has certain qualities like super strength, or he's just blessed to have the gods bless him, like Perseus or something like that, where he's able to defeat certain titans because of who his lineage is. And so they're existing in a world where they're coming into contact with things like, oh, well, is it half and half? Jesus
what exactly does it mean?
Is kind of this mixture. And so these things, while we wouldn't think is important, are, and the hair splitting is maybe what we would call it, is very important at that time and place to understand
to get it right.
exactly, the kind of the ontology of what makes the Incarnation, Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity, unique, and what does that makeup look like and consist of, and what are the implications from that too, especially when it comes to the death and resurrection. What is exactly who is he dying for? How is he dying? Is it effective, and for whom? And all these questions. So what we think might be hair splitting is turns out to be very important when you get down to those questions and ask, okay, well, if Jesus is like this, then how does he do whatever it is he does?
Yeah, exactly. And so Christensen says, only one who is truly and perfectly God and at the same time truly and perfectly man can undo the malevolent forces wreaking havoc on our planet and the ruin of creations, creators, right? The creations of God who bear a shattered image of their God. Right, only one who is both God and man can resolve this particular issue is what he's getting at, and so the Incarnation had to happen.
Yeah. And it is this idea of the Trinity, which we always, I think early on we say things like, oh, it's 1 + 1 + 1 = 1. It's like, well, if you want to get in there, it's 1 × 1 × 1, or it's this understanding of
use the right math.
Well, yeah, there's a Trinity where I'm having to kind of think of my what exactly are my classifications, and so being and person come in, and so within the nature of Christ, he doesn't exist like in a Trinity form himself, but he is of two natures. He is of a fullness of two. And so he has to be both in order for this to happen. And is that possible? And so as we get further into this chapter, again, a really good job of showing exactly why this needs to be and why these definitions are important. All right, so the mystery of the Incarnation says that he goes on to say, even though Chalcedon brought us a clarity concerning the identity of Christ, it was not removed. It hasn't removed all the mystery surrounding the Incarnation. Who would think that an all-powerful, all-knowing God who creates everything out of nothing would leave us with a few questions?
Yeah, really. Some mystery.
I'm not exactly sure how this happens. Well, okay. Well, we only have a certain book that we view as his authoritative word, and guess what? He doesn't tell us why our Aunt Anne had to die at a certain point in time. But does it speak to the greater story of why death is happening, and how does he move within that? Well, he doesn't tell us absolutely everything. Right, there is still this mystery retained, but it does offer us a specific revelation that we wouldn't have gotten just by looking out to the stars and thinking about things really, really hard. Without forfeiting anything of his infinite divine essence, again, very important, the Son of God suddenly appears within his person a finite human nature that would appear to be incongruous with his pre-existing divine nature. It seems contradictory, but instead of contradiction, it's a paradox. It's this unexpected thing that happens, and in a Old Testament, in a world where unexpected comes from what is expected. Oh, it's definitely going to be this first person that's going to hold the power. Oh, second person. Oh, that's right. It's not even these two. It's the third one. These unexpected things happen, and we should expect the unexpected.
Right. Yeah, and that's what Christensen tells us, right? This does not create a contradiction, right? He asks the question, does it? Right? He says, how the issue is how can the uncreated creator, right, and the created be united in one person, right? That's, he says it seems like asking how fire and ice can coexist.
Yeah. Right? And this hot fire is really cold. Yeah.
But he says there's really no formal contradiction.
Right, an A and a not A. Right, it's the car's in the garage and it's not in the garage. That would be a formal contradiction.
Exactly right. He says but there is a deep, as you mentioned there, paradox and mystery, right? One that is essential to our understanding of how the crisis of the fall not only is solved, but supremely magnifies the glory of the transcendent authority of history, right? So he solves a problem and it glorifies God at the same time.
Right. And then he moves on for the reason of the Incarnation. He says, why all the fuss to maintain these precisely calibrated tensions? Why not just, it's God in human form, and, we don't really care about what happens after that. Why does things like the hypostatic union matter? Big words. It seems like, a mixture of natures or separation, but 100% fully versus half and half. Why does all this matter? Well, because the precise and unparalleled dynamic that encompasses the identity of Christ are critical to the work of Christ. Redeeming a wretched world requires a special Redeemer. Exactly. Such a unique Redeemer would need to be free from the stain of sin that affects every other human creature in order to offer himself to God as an acceptable propitiation, as atoning sacrifice to sin. We find that in Hebrews 2 and 1 Peter 1. And so this uniqueness where he has to have kind of a human nature, but it also seems like the Bible says if you have a human nature, it is impossible to fully carry out. Yeah. You have to be almost God-like in order to carry out the law. Yeah. So how do we do it? Yeah. The Incarnation.
That's right. So he has a human nature, and yet he's without sin. Right. So that's the uniqueness of Christ. And thus all mankind, without exception, falls under divine retributive condemnation, right? God's retribution. But God, in his unexpected extraordinary grace and electing freedom, may choose to pardon some of the ill-deserving sinners, right? That's what Ephesians 1 talks about, by diverting their just punishment to the uniquely suited God-man, whose penal substitutionary death effectively secures the expiation. Boy, he's really getting into it here, right? Yeah. That means the removal, to expiate, to remove their guilt while meeting his own righteous demands. So God uses Christ, right, the God-man, as our substitution so that our guilt and sin would be removed. That's what he's attempting to say here, right? Or at least that's what he is saying, and I'm attempting to repeat it, right?
Theology words all the way down.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so he tells us that if that substitute were himself stained by sin, and this is the point we were making earlier, right? If Jesus was just a human, if he was stained by sin, then his death would fail as an atonement, right? It would be nothing more, he tells us, than the just recompense of his own rebellion, right?
Right. So how does he pay? How does he live a perfect life? And then how does he pay for everyone? So it needs to be this both. It's a yes and type answer here. So the reconciliation of sinners to a holy God could happen no other way except through both the humble incarnation of the Son of God and the high cost involved in his bloody atonement. In John 14 and Acts 4 says this: the incarnation and atonement are inseparably linked. It needs to be both here. The human blood of the incarnate second person of the Trinity had to be spilled. God in his immaterial being has no circulatory system, no heart, no arteries, no veins, and no blood. For God to shed blood, he had to become man.
Absolutely.
There's a quote that he pulls here. I wrote, wow, exclamation mark, twice in this chapter. And so I have to read this. So he's quoting the nihilist Albert Camus, who I've read some of his stuff before. And he comes from this philosophy. One of his most well-known one is without meaning in the universe, because, there's nothing outside of us. There's only what we bring to the table, and I can't even be sure about you. So if all life is pain, you're welcome. I know my mind. I don't know other minds. So since all life is pain, is it moral? Is it the correct response to kind of kill yourself? And that's kind of the question. Right. He brings in, well, if there's no meaning out there, then we can generate.
He says suicide is really the first and only serious question in philosophy. Yeah. That's what he says, right?
And Camus is kind of known for pithy things, but if you read kind of his larger things, you kind of get bogged down in type nature. But he says this, and I'm going to read this entire quote that he provides, because So this is a nihilist. This is an unbeliever. This is someone who hears this message and rejects it. So he says, in that Christ has suffered and had suffered voluntarily, suffering was no longer unjust, and all pain was necessary. In one sense, Christianity's bitter intuition and legitimate pessimism concerning human behavior is based on the assumption that overall injustice is as satisfying to man as total justice. Only the sacrifice of an innocent God could justify the endless and universal torture of innocence. Only the most abject suffering by God and the assuage man's agony. If everything, without exception, in heaven and earth is doomed to pain and suffering, then a strange form of happiness is possible. So this is, again, an unbeliever who is probably writing way better on why the incarnation has to happen and what that means and what it requires, then I'll put myself on the chopping block. Anything that I could come up with, and he does just really, really well on pulling this quote. Christensen must have had this in his back pocket to post it up on his board with the yarn on it to bring this chapter together. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.